Okay, in this last video we're going to take a look at the idea of total return or horizon return and how to measure that. First thing, it's important to note that this is a percentage. It's not a dollar amount that we were looking at in the last video, but we're measuring now in percentages. The total return is a measure of the yield that allows the reinvestment rate to be different than the yield of maturity. So recall, with the yield of maturity, the assumed reinvestment rate of return is going to be equal to the yield of maturity. It's an internal rate of return that's consistent throughout the investment horizon. With total return, we can relax that assumption, and we're going to make an explicit assumption, a very specific one, about what the reinvestment rate will be. We can allow it to be different than the yield to maturity, for instance. And we're also going to make an assumption about what the time horizon will be, so we can let it differ from the maturity date. And we're going to compute what the yield will be for these cash flows. So in this third point, we're going to first compute the total future dollars that we'll have with our assumed reinvestment rate. We're then going to determine the rate that will make the initial purchase price equal to the future value of all of our cash flows. So this is probably best seen by using an example. So let's go to the next slide here and consider an investor with a 4-year horizon. They're looking at a bond that has 18 years to maturity, a 7% coupon. It's trading for $862.97. First thing, we're going to verify that the yield of maturity is 8.5%. And then we want to use some of these assumptions down here. We believe that the investor can reinvest at a rate of 5.5%, and that in 4 years the bonds will sell at a yield of maturity of 7.5%. So first, let's verify the yield of maturity for this bond. And it's probably best to do that with a calculator here. So let's just pull this up. We're going to clear out the memory and then start here. We got 18 years times 2, so 36 periods. The coupon is $70 per year. Divide that by 2 to get the periodic payment of $35. We got a $1,000 future value. The price is $862.97 with a negative sign. And so if we compute the periodic rate, we've got 4.25 every 6 months. So when we multiply that times 2, we would get a yield of maturity of 8.5%. So indeed, we do have the yield of maturity of 8.5. And now we're going to relax those assumptions built into the yield of maturity. That is, you hold it all 18 years and the reinvestment rate is at 8.5%. We're going to change those to have a reinvestment rate of 5.5 and a holding period of only 4 years. So the first thing we need to do in terms of the bond is think about what that future value is going to be. It's no longer going to be $1,000 because we're going to sell it prior to year 18, prior to the maturity. We're going to sell it in 4 years, and the assumptions here, it tells us that we can sell it at a yield to maturity of 7.5%. So let's go to Excel and just look at all of this real quick. First, we got up here in the top left, we can figure out what the future value of all the coupon income being reinvested over our 4-year horizon. So the number of periods, we got 4 years times 2 periods per year, so 8 total periods. The periodic rate is going to be 5.5% divided by 2, so 2.75% per period. The cash flows are $35 every 6 months, and so to find out what those cash flows are going to grow to over our 4-year horizon, we can just compute the future value of those cash flows using the 5.5% discount rate. So we get an answer of $308.48. And so this is saying that by reinvesting the coupon payments at an annual rate of 5.5%, we'll end up with $308.48 after 4 years. So that's the first step in figuring out our total return percentage. The next step is to take a look and figure out what the price of our bond is going to be in 4 years. So the bond will have 14 years left to maturity. So we started off with an 18-year bond. After 4 years, it will become a 14-year bond. So we'll have 28 periods left in this bond. The periodic rate is going to be 7.5%. We put that in the assumption here that the yield of maturity will be 7.5% when we sell it in 4 years. So that's where this is showing up in our calculation. 7.5%, divide that by 2 to get the periodic rate. The cash flows is still going to be $35 per 6 months, and our future value will be $1,000 if you hold it all the way to the end of these now 14 years. So we solve for the present value, and I've changed the sign there. I've turned it into a positive result. So we've got a price in 4 years, given our assumptions, of $957.11. So now we need to determine the total cash flows from our investment in this bond. We got $308 that we'll have at the end of the 4 years from our reinvested coupons. We've got a disposition of the bond of $957, and so our total cash that we'll end up with by result of investing in this bond is $1,265.60. So the total return, all we're doing is answering the question, what rate do I need to invest my money at in order to end up with $1,265.60? So recall that our initial investment was $862. Again, that was back on the slide in the PDF. We're turning that into $1,265, so we just solve for the rate that does that. We're doing that over 8 periods, right? A 4-year holding period. We invest $862. We're ending up with $1,265.60. We're going to have 0 as the periodic payment. We're not going to have any interim cash flows. We've already figured out how our cash flows should look, how they should work. And so all we do is solve for the rate. We're going to multiply that times 2. And that will be our total return for this bond, given our assumptions, given our reinvestment assumptions, and given our pricing assumptions at the end of our holding period. So in this case, our total return for this bond would be 9.81%. Again, given all the assumptions that we made back here in the slide, that we're going to hold it 4 years, that our reinvestment rate is 5.5, etc. If we changed any of those assumptions, obviously our total return or our horizon return, by the way, those are synonymous, those returns would be slightly different. So we've figured out the total return, and let's just wrap up the slideshow here. Horizon analysis, this is very handy for helping us pick bonds that best fit the portfolio's needs. Not all bonds that have similar yield to maturities will have the same total return, depending on our reinvestment assumptions and our holding periods. So it's best, especially if you don't have a match between the maturity and the holding period, that you go through this horizon analysis, which is basically this calculation. We just go through these assumptions and these calculations for a bond and find out what that total return is, in the same way of speaking, what the horizon return for that bond would be. So that is all of the material for this particular video, for this particular chapter, and we'll move on to the next topic in the next video, and I will see you then.